This is a production of Cornell University.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Professor van der Wevel. I will give you a brief outline of viticulture in South Africa today, and I'd like to ask if you have any questions right at the end. When anything is not clear, just feel free to ask. And of course, have some South African wine, and we can discuss the wines afterwards. So like Justine mentioned, I'm a lecturer at Stellenbosch University in the Department of Viticulture and Enology. And for those of you that might have forgotten where South Africa is, it's the green highlighted country on the continent of Africa. I know some people get confused with Africa and sometimes, or South Africa, because they sometimes think that Africa is a country and not a continent. So that's why I'm just putting it out there. So if you look at the country or the map of South Africa, we have 9 provinces. It's similar to the states that you have here, here in the US. And every state, we have 9 different provinces or states. And then we have the Western Cape, which is our legislative county or capital, or where our parliament is. And then we've got the executive county, which is Gauteng province up in Pretoria, the red area. That's also the place or the province where all the embassies are situated in South Africa. So if somebody say anything or mention Stellenbosch, this is normally the picture that pops up. The first picture up in the left-hand corner, that's our main campus. And the building that you can see there is actually the, this building here is the J.H. Needling building where our department is situated. This is the famous Red Square, and underneath this is our library, our main library, which is one of the biggest libraries on the African continent. And then we've got a student center in there where students can get something to eat, a coffee, and go to an ATM, and our administration building. So this is the buzz or the hub on campus. Stellenbosch is also has a lot of mountain ranges, vineyards, of course. It's in the heart of the Cape Winelands. A little bit more about Stellenbosch University, dates back to the 17th century. It was first established in 1866, and it was renamed Victoria College in 1887. And in 2018, we celebrated our centenary celebration, and we had lots of festivities happening on campus, but also for our alumni all around the world. The faculty of, we have 10 different faculties, and the faculties are spread on 5 campuses in the Western Cape, with most of them situated on the main campus, except for the medical and health sciences, which is on the premises of a very big provincial hospital, and the military sciences, which is up on the West Coast, where they do, of course, some military work and some research, hence the location of that. In our department, we've got 11 different departments in our Faculty of Agri-Sciences, ranging from agricultural economics, agronomy, animal sciences, food sciences, genetics, horticulture, soil sciences, and of course, viticulture and enology. The Department of Viticulture and Enology dates back since 1925. In our building, we also have the Institute for Wine Biotechnology, and I will explain to you a little bit later why we have an Institute for Wine Biotechnology. Very recently, we also had established the IGWS, the Institute for Grape and Wine Sciences, and they were established to create a link between research and industry for mostly technology transfer. And we are unique in South Africa because we are the only university where you can study a degree program, a BSc degree program in viticulture and enology. So we have students from all over South Africa, but also it's becoming a popular destination for international students and specifically postgrads as well. So in terms of our training, we've got 2 degrees. One is a BSc Agri in grapevine and wine sciences. And I want to, for those of you that might venture on the internet and go and look up on this. We are busy currently recirculating, so there might be differences in some of the information because we're changing it at the moment. But it's the first year is basically a BSc year where you do biology, chemistry, some grapevine and wine sciences, mathematics, computer literacy, and crop production. And the second year is some science modules, some statistics as well, and grapevine sciences, which I will do with the students. Our academic year starts in February and it ends in October, with the first semester ending mid or in May. And the students then write exams after that. The second semester normally starts in July and it ends in mid-October. And the students write exams until the first week in December. Our graduations, we've got 2 graduations, one in December and one in March. Just to give you some context, because I know it differs here in the US. Our students normally start making wine in our 3rd year. After getting some viticulture experience in the field. So they have the opportunity to make some wine in the experimental cellar within our building. And our 4th year, our students have a 6-month internship. So we don't see them for 6 months, and I have less gray hair during that period. And they only come back in July of their 4th year or the final year. So during the 6-month period or the final year, they have to do some practical viticultural experience, both in wine or table grapes, because we also have a very big table grape industry. And on the knowledge side, the students also have to work in the cellar. So we try to give them 6 to 8 weeks in the vineyard to see most of the processes in the vineyard. And then they go to the cellar, work in the cellar, have a research project, and then we try to get them back in the vineyard to do some pruning. Our facilities, I mentioned previously that we've got an experimental cellar in our basement. It's where our research wines are made. We also have, this is also why our 3rd year students make some research wines, or when they start playing around with grapes and experimenting. We've got greenhouse facilities right in the middle of our building. Research laboratories where my colleagues are doing some of their lab work, both on yeast and plant metabolics. And we've also got an analytical facility with HPLCs, etc. About 2 kilometers away from the main campus, we have an experimental farm on Welgevallen, and it's 14 hectares of vineyards. But we also share it with the rest of our faculty, as there are also dairy and pear and other horticultural crops. But we have 14 hectares of vineyards, and we also conduct some research in these vineyards. But we also use these grapes for commercial winemaking, which is then being labeled under the Stellenbosch University wine label and sold to the public. So in terms of our student numbers, unfortunately, I don't have the 2019 numbers yet because the students will only register next week for the new academic year. But normally we have in the range of 150 to 200 students. We cap our undergraduate numbers at 50 students per year, only because the industry cannot accommodate such a lot of students in the industry. Because we also have, there is also an agricultural college, Elsenburg, which also offers a diploma program in viticulture and enology or cellar technology. So it actually becomes very big and popular program, and that's why we cap the numbers. But like I mentioned before, we have a lot of international students currently also joining the program, starting with undergrad already. On the postgrad side, if our students completed the BSc in grapevine and wine sciences, they can continue directly with the MSc. We have a couple of US students at the moment wrapping up their master's degrees. And then of course, they've got the option to continue with a PhD. I mentioned before about the Institute for Wine Institute for Wine Biotechnology. And if a student completed a BSc degree, say in engineering or chemistry, a 4-year degree, they have the option to continue directly with the MSc and then with a PhD. And if a student did a 3-year BSc program in biology, for instance, they first need to do an honors, MSc, and a PhD. So basically, these students can either work on the plant molecular side or on the yeast side, even bacteria work with some of my colleagues at the Institute for Wine Biotechnology. In terms of our research, we try to have an integrated approach to integrate a lot of research aspects, ranging from microclimatic aspects, berry characteristics, molecular profiles, the fermentations, metabolic profiling, and of course the sensory aspects. Because the industry is starting to ask us to combine research projects, and many times we're actually all doing the same thing, but just in different projects. So we've decided over the last couple of years to streamline some of our work to actually have a better flow of research ideas as well. Just to give you an idea, this is a table with all the academics, my colleagues in the department with the different fields of expertise. Dr. Strever working on grapevine physiology, plant management and remote sensing. Ms. Eunice Avenant, she's actually our table grape expert. Dr. Pobletti, he's an expert on remote sensing. He joined us about 2-3 years ago from Chile. And then my knowledge colleagues, Marit and Florian, working on malolactic fermentation, alcoholic fermentation, and Vessel and Marion working on wine aging, aroma. And you might have noticed that we have a very big problem in the Western Cape because of the droughts. We have fires. So we have a very big problem in smoke tank, similar to what they experience in Washington State and in California. So one of my colleagues, she's actually defending a PhD next week on the aspects of smoke taint. Then Professor Melanie Vivier and her research group, Philip Young and John Moore, they work on molecular and metabolite profiling within a vineyard setting. And my other colleagues, Dr. Evodia Sitati, as she uses metagenomic, she has a metagenomic approach. Something really interesting that she's been working on, she looks at yeast genetics under different cultivation practices, because we have encountered specifically with old vine Chenin. It's Chenin Blanc vineyards older than 35 years that normally have a different characteristic and a different taste. And we started a project by looking at what actually influences the mouthfeel properties of those wines by taking it back and looking what's happening within the vineyard. Then my colleague, Dr. Leon Nivout, she's on the rapid analytical techniques. The expert then also sensory aspects. Astrid Boyka, working mostly on the analytical side. And some of you might remember Professor Antonio Ferreira, who is an extraordinary professor at Stellenbosch University, but he is from Porto University in Portugal. Just to give you an idea, I mentioned that we are trying to do integrated projects. This is a project on Sauvignon Blanc in the Elgin area. It's about 30 to 40 minutes drive from Stellenbosch. It's a cool climate area, and the design was done by Professor Alain Deloire initially, and they applied these treatments within the vineyard to see what the impact of light quality and quantity will be on the different, on the grape quality and the metabolites. And these are 4 of the publications that they got from that one vineyard by just integrating all of the results. So that's just to show you what I meant with integrating all our research projects. So, and it's been working very well in this case. So back to the South African wine history. The first wine was made in 1659. So if you do the mathematics, this year will be the 300th 60th year of winemaking in South Africa. It happened on the 2nd of February by Jan van Riebeeck, which was settlers going to India, and they needed some fresh water and vegetables while on the way to India. And they stopped in Cape Town to get the necessary resources. And on the shipment, they also had some grapevine cuttings. And that's how wine started. We were also confronted with phylloxera in the 1880s. So all our vines are grafted in South Africa. And I don't know how, has anybody heard of Pinotage before? Tasted it? Okay. So Pinotage is a proudly South African cultivar. It's a cross between Pinot Noir and Cinsault Noir. And one of the wines that we'll be tasting today has a Pinotage component in it as well. Of course, that's not the only South African variety or proudly South African variety. We also have Novelle and Rubinay, which was crossed in South Africa and which we also use, but it's not as popular as Pinotage. So in 1973, the wine of origin system evolved. And this is based on the notion of terroir, that wine should taste like the place where it comes from. So our wine of origin system is divided into geographical units, districts, wards, as well as single vineyards. And in South Africa, we have 5 demarcated areas, geographical units for wine production and table grape production. So here we've got the Limpopo province. Here they basically have mostly table grapes. The Northern Cape, it's a very dry and arid region. And they get all their water from the Orange River. So all the agricultural activity happens along this river. And it's mostly table grapes and wine grapes here as well. The Western Cape, of course, this is the heart of all the wine production. The Eastern Cape is a fairly new region, as well as KwaZulu-Natal, which is starting to become very popular because of its slopes and hills that it has in close proximity to the ocean. Then the areas of wine production. Of course, we have the different areas of wine production, and they vary in climatic indices as well, with the red area or the Klein Karoo area being, I call it the hot as hell region. We mostly have only Portuguese varieties there. So if you want good dessert wines, of course, in South Africa, we're not allowed to call it port. Dessert wines, this is the area where you can get it from. The Cape South Coast is much cooler area, and it's mostly white wines, but also a lot of like Pinot Noirs, your lighter style of reds that's being produced there. And then the coastal region is also very popular, high yielding areas that we get. Then we have smaller pockets, wine of origin, and there are plenty of them, so I won't go through all of them, but it's just to give you an idea of all the different wine regions that we have. But just in terms of grape vineyards per region, I mentioned that the Klein Karoo is the very dry and arid region as well, and they have the smallest or the lowest number of grapevines. And then Stellenbosch, the heart of the winelands, has the most vineyards per region. To give you an idea of the cultivars, Chenin Blanc is the most planted grape variety, white grape variety in South Africa. We also have more Chenin Blanc in South Africa than in France, where it actually originated from. And we actually use it for a lot of wine styles, dry wine, up until sweet wines, and also for brandy production, because brandy production is very popular and important in South Africa. Then also we have Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a very important grape variety in the Stellenbosch region, and it's extremely delicate grapes, and it does well in the Stellenbosch region because of the soil type, deep red soils. I mentioned old vine Chenin earlier. And a couple of years ago, one of the businessmen in South Africa, Dr. Rupert, he gave some funding for a project to actually start looking into old vines because they make a different style of wine. And one of the viticulturists, Rosa Creer, started looking into where are these vines and what potential do they actually have. And they came up with this list of old vines. And of course, most of the younger generation winemakers, they want to get hold of these grapes, and it costs a lot, of course, to produce these grapes. So everybody wants to get hold of these grapes because it has a different taste and the wine quality is just exceptional. Cape Classics and some other friends of mine informed me that the US market takes about 60% of South African Chenin Blanc. So thank you guys for drinking South African Chenin and making it great, because it is really good. Just to give you an idea of wine cellars, the most wine cellars is based in the Stellenbosch region. This is the statistics of 2017. And of course, they're also different in size, and some are also cooperative cellars. You might be wondering if we only make wine. I mentioned earlier that we also have brandy production, but our wine production actually increased over the last 12 years or 10 years. Brandy production decreased, distilling products also decreased, and then we also have grape juice concentrate and grape juice production. And there's something really interesting, or the reason for this, which I will get to in a bit. And if we have to rank ourselves and looking at the rest of the world, the US is ranked 6th in terms of area under vines. And for South Africa, we are ranked in 14th position. And in terms of wine production, the US is in the 4th position and South Africa in the 8th position. So it's just interesting to see. And of course, Spain, number 1. And also on the marketing side, what happens with all of those wines, which is of course always interesting.
So Erna, should we go ahead and taste our Chenin Blanc, or are you going to talk?
Please go ahead and taste the Chenin Blanc. And it's Indaba is one of the brands from Cape Classics. It's made by Brewer Raads, which is a winemaker that also has his own label. So what you should be tasting is some crisp lemon, some citrus notes, and that's synonymous with a young Chenin Blanc in South Africa. So we can get the tasting notes afterwards. Then in terms of distilled product consumption per capita, South Africa only consumes about 2.2 liters per person. And that is because in terms of the demographics in South Africa, the majority of the population loves drinking beer and whiskey rather, but mere a beer drinking population. And we're trying to change it, but of course it's difficult to change a consumer's perception because it's lots of training. But it's something that from a wine marketing perspective, there's lots of room to actually improve in and to actually try to find new ways of making it a little bit better. Then in terms of wine consumption, yet again, you guys are drinking a little bit more wine than South Africans, because South Africa only drinks about 7.6 liters per person. But yet again, as I mentioned before, South Africans like to drink beer as well. And a new craze is gin and tonic. Gin, it's very, very popular at the moment as well.
The Portuguese drink an amazing amount of wine per capita.
It must be the food. So in terms of table grape production, we have a couple of areas of table grape production. I mentioned earlier the Limpopo province. This is actually the province where they harvest. It's the first grapes that is harvested. It's normally in October. And for those of you that are interested, this is actually where the Kruger National Park is as well. where you can go on safari. And then the Orange River, also very big in table grape production area. In the Western Cape itself, we've got a couple of production areas. The Olifants River, which means the Elephants River, the Berg River, Mountain River, as well as the Hex River Valley, which is the region or table grape region, which normally finish or is harvested at the end. So in terms of grape production, in terms of for cultivars, Crimson Seedless is the most planted grape cultivar, and we export a lot to the US and of course Europe and the UK. Those are our main markets for table grapes.
Can you tell us some agricultural economics? Great.
Yes.
So during the winters, I used to go down to New York with my father, who was in this business. We used to get the best black Riviera grapes from South Africa. I don't see South African production, at least here in Italy. Are you still, is the production just diminished going to the United States or what?
Actually, one of my friends working in the industry, Tineke, she actually sent me some pictures last week showing that they actually just shipped a lot of grapes to the US, which was meant for Costco. I think the other countries like Chile, etc., are much closer because we still need to transport it over the Atlantic.
But they're not as good. The black Rivieras, I still remember, is the best from South Africa, from the Cape.
That's why you need to come and visit, and we can make it.
I've been to Stellenbosch. No, I've been there, but I'm just wondering why we don't get that here.
It must be the market requirements and also the importers. So if somebody doesn't like the grapes, of course, then we can't export it.
That's great. Okay, thank you.
So just some pictures of red globe and some sugar ones within the field. Just checking for size. Of course, size is extremely important for table grapes as it is an aesthetic product. To take you a bit back and give you some information about what's happening in the current situation in terms of viticulture. Before 1994, South African wines and other agricultural products were boycotted because of the apartheid. And there was an increase in exports of South African wines from 1995 onwards. The producer profit margins started to become really good. There was also the cultivation of the noble cultivars, so your Cabernet Sauvignons, your Merlots, etc. I remember I was a fourth-year student at that time, and my professor told us, please plant only red grape varieties, because this is where your money will be, where you will make a lot of money. Only to find out 5 years later, everybody wanted white wines again. So this is what happened during that period. And of course, like I said, everybody started planting red grape cultivars. Our viticulture practices is mostly VSP, vertical shoot positioning system. And it's a very labor-intensive practice, but there's also a proportion of our vineyards which are used as where we do not trellis, or we have goblet, like the French would say, or bush vines, and they are even more labor-intensive. So we try to move away from having very labor-intensive practices, but in South Africa we do have the labor. And that comes with a different set of problems, which I will address in a slide in a minute or two. Then, of course, also we started using better irrigation systems and the management thereof. Because in the past, everybody mostly did flat irrigation, but we started to become aware of a better irrigation system like dripping and micro drips and sprayers. So that is what everybody is using at the moment. Between 2006 and 2016, grape and wine prices started to stagnate. And that, of course, put South African wine producers under financial pressure. We also saw a decrease in the number of grape producers because people were more interested in cultivating more profitable crops. And if you go to wine farms in Stellenbosch, You will see, currently, you will see a lot of them have some microbreweries as well. So you can decide whether you want a beer or a glass of wine. And some of them might have bakeries. Some of them even have cattle where you can buy some biltong. It's similar to jerky, but it's better than jerky. Don't shoot me. But it's a dried meat with spices, and you can find all sorts of interesting things. Also some other crops like citrus, etc., which people are now farming just to break even or make a little bit profit. And of course, those are some of the strategies that they're following to make themselves profitable. Also, breeding of cultivars for higher production. Quality versus quantity becomes a big question mark. And it's been something that a lot of producers have been working on, changing the viticultural practices to different trellising systems. I mentioned earlier that we have the labor in South Africa, but a couple of years ago, right in the middle of the table grape harvest in the Hex River Valley, they had strikes. People didn't want to go to work because they said they weren't paid the minimum wage. So that ended up with fruit that were rotting on the vineyards, not being able to be packed and shipped to the US and to other countries. And government had to intervene because, of course, it's a very big commodity in that area, and also labor provides labor in the area. And of course, mechanization. We try to have increased mechanization, but of course, there's always two sides to the story, and have less labor inputs. Presently, these are some interesting things that happened the last couple of years. The profitability is still under pressure. Just last week, there was a very big industry day in Cape Town, and it became clear that South African wines are still very cheap. And people are always amazed when they start talking about price point of wine. So bulk wine sells for about R4.50 a liter to wholesalers and R5.50 a liter overseas. So the strategy was basically to increase more packaged products or bottled wines instead of bulk wines. Our wine stock levels are also a bit low, and that is because of the drought we experienced the past 3 years. Last year it was particularly bad. I'm sure you guys saw on social media and all over the world how we struggled. But fortunately, some of the fruit growers gave some water to the city of Cape Town, which were able to help the rest of us. And yes, we were limited to 50 liters of water per day. So it was quite tough at times, but we managed to pull through. And the past season we had a bit of winter rain, still not at the level that it should be, but at least there will be sufficient soil moisture to help with the vines for the growing season. Then something very topical at the moment. Even your president got involved during the discussions a couple of months ago, and he told our president to get his act together and sort out this problem. It's a land reform. So it's a very sensitive issue in South Africa at the moment, and I got word from a friend of mine working in government that they're not going to change it very drastically at the moment, because of all the emotional aspects that goes with it, because they didn't want to compensate farmers for doing this. So like I said, this is something that's hot and happening at the moment. So if you hear anything about land reform, you more or less know what's happening or have an idea. In terms of future aspects, we're looking into more precision viticulture. Also, we want to have smaller producers are overpowered by bigger producers, which is of course not a good thing. I mentioned production versus quality, quantity, mechanization should increase, and then of course planting of cultivars which are drought tolerant. We need higher production, and of course, climate change aspects, we should keep in mind that as well. This is our first vineyard robot, Robot X, or we call him Dassie. It's still a prototype. It's a collaboration between the CSIR and the Institute for Grape and Wine Sciences. And they were still testing Dassie. Last year, I haven't spoken to my colleague yet to find out what's happening and how Dassie is doing. But I know just before I left in July, Dassie went for some tire repairs because Dassie tipped over in the vineyard while they were looking at some pruning strategies. Also the use of EM38, which is also, of course, to scan the soil and to see, to check for the water status in the subsoil. So I want to conclude my presentation with a video while you guys are sipping on some pinotage.
Down near the southern tip of Africa lies the South African city of Cape Town. It's regarded as one of the world's most beautiful cities and is a highly sought-after tourist destination, with world-famous attractions like its beaches, the waterfront, and of course Table Mountain. Cape Town is also the gateway to the renowned Cape Winelands, where over 95% of South Africa's wines are produced. They are among the most respected wines in the world, and there's quite a story to tell about them. Or rather, there are two stories to tell. The one is about making better wines, the other is about making wines better. It's really no surprise that South African wines are so highly regarded. After all, we have over 350 years of rich winemaking history to draw on. It's a history that includes Dutch, German, Italian and French influences, embracing all the best traditions of old world wines. But our winemaking industry is also young enough to explore more modern New World styles. The other factor behind the quality of our wines is the extraordinary geography and climate of the region. The Cape Winelands fall within the Cape Floral Kingdom, the world's smallest but richest floral kingdom. There are more plant species in this southwestern corner of South Africa than there are in the entire Northern Hemisphere. This natural wealth is a result of the region's unique landscape. It has the oldest viticultural soils in the world. It embraces two oceans, the Atlantic to the west and the Indian to the east, both of which bring sea breezes, mist and fog, and it has various mountain ranges, slopes and valleys, which offer micro, macro and mesoclimates, with different degrees of sunshine, shade and shelter. These influences make for a spectacularly diverse range of environments and conditions. It presents endless winemaking opportunities and offers winemakers an incredible palette with which to express themselves. To match the sites, there's also a wide range of grapes. We have a uniquely South African red variety, Pinotage, which is a cross between Pinot Noir and Hermitage. And there are more Chenin Blanc vineyards in South Africa than any other country. Add a number of other major varieties and dozens of recently introduced grapes, along with some very old vines, and you have the makings of extraordinary wines, enjoyed and admired throughout South Africa and around the world. If our history and environment have helped us produce such good wines, it's only right that we should think of our future and look after our natural resources. For this, we take our cue from the Thamsan, the indigenous people of South Africa. 80,000 years back, they were the original environmentalists, living in harmony with nature and taking from the earth only what it could replenish. The South African wine industry is taking its responsibilities seriously. Thanks to the Biodiversity and Wine Initiative, more of our wineland has been set aside for conservation than the total area under vineyard. And almost all wine producers farm according to established guidelines to manage water resources and ensure sustainable growing methods. Of course, it's not enough just to be earth-friendly. Our producers need to be people-friendly too. Through organizations like the Wine Industry Ethical Trade Association and the Fair Trade Foundation, investment in programs and infrastructure constantly improves working and living conditions. It's significant that South Africa has the most fair trade wines in the world. These principles have vastly expanded our definition of quality. While since 1973, the Wine of Origin scheme has certified the origin, vintage and variety of wines, the new Integrity and Sustainability seal takes the concept of good wine even further. Introduced in 2010, this world first guarantees the wine's environmental and social responsibility credentials according to measurable, auditable criteria, while also making it possible to trace the wine all the way back to the vineyard. So by considering the consequences of how we work and thinking ahead for the next generations, we're not just making better wine, we're also making wine better. These are some of the reasons South African wine is up there with the world's best. We're doing good things by considering our environment and by embracing the variety in it. There's variety beyond our natural environment too. If you visit us here in the Cape Winelands, you'll see diversity all around you. After all, we're not called the Rainbow Nation for nothing. Our wine routes are set in constantly changing but always breathtaking landscapes. Along them you'll find a plethora of different people, cultures, languages and histories. You'll find mountains and oceans, distractions for nature lovers and luxury lovers, thrill seekers and relaxation seekers. You'll find some of the world's best hotels and guest houses, spas, golf courses and restaurants. And of course, an abundance of vineyards, wineries and estates. It's well worth a visit. But if that's not possible, you can always enjoy some of our wines. They're not just good, they're better.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
How much does it cost a student to get a degree in Stellenbosch? And you have 115 students. Is that as many as you can take, or could you take more? Or just like the supply and demand for degrees and how much it costs to get a 4-year degree?
It's basically just the reason why we cap it at 50 students is because the industry can't take up 50 students every year just from Stellenbosch. Like I mentioned before, we also have the Agricultural College, Elsenburg, and our students actually compete with them to finding work. So what a lot of our students do, they do traveling winemaking. So after they completed their degree, they will go and harvest 3, 4, maybe in the Northern Hemisphere, come back to the Southern Hemisphere for 3, 4 years, and then they find a place. To answer your question, it's about 80 to 90,000 Rand per year. So divide that by 14, almost 14, that will be the amount of dollar. I think that's why, and I normally ask international students, why do you come and study here? And they tell me they come and study here because it's a little bit cheaper than in the US or even in Europe. But it's still more expensive for international students than for our own students. So, yes.
Why can't you call wine port? The dessert wines, why can't you call them wine?
It's because of the legislation, because it comes from the region Porto in Portugal. Yeah, yeah. That's why we're not allowed to call it. So we have to call it fortified wine. It's just legislation things matters. So the same with champagne. We're not allowed to call champagne, even though it's. So. All right. Yes.
Actually, what is the main challenge for the people of South Africa? Because I was reading that it's the drought stress that there are other challenges. What are you thinking to do with drought stress? Are you working, I know, with breeding and something else?
It's definitely drought and also grape prices because producers, they don't get a lot of money for their grapes. But we've been told last year and this year it's going to change, and you can see that there's already an improvement in that regard because they're now getting higher prices for the grapes. But with the drought, of course, grapes become very scarce. So now it becomes a competition who can afford the grapes and who can't. So lots of people are excluded again. But I would definitely say drought and the grape and the stress, drought stress as well as grape prices.
For wine sector, what they think about drought stress? Because some wine sectors think drought stress is good for berry qualities. So
that's why I'm here in the States and doing berry shrivel to see if that will improve our quality or what actually happens in the berry. Nobody has done the work before in South Africa. Lots of groups in Australia has done it, in Europe as well. And of course, the group of Marcus Keller, I don't know if anyone is working on it on this side of the continent, just to see what the impact would be. And I agree, some people say it makes it better, others not, but it's all about the timing. We were talking, I did my final presentation last week, and we were talking, what is the window? What is the time frame? Window period to harvest the grapes, because some producers or winemakers say you need to leave the grapes longer to get that flavor development. So it's a big debate. And I will continue, I'm actually continuing the project that I started here back in South Africa to see if we can find something useful from it. So maybe I'll have an answer for you in a couple of months.
All right, is there one more quick question before we wrap things up?
That's a quick question then. So I work in apples and hard cider production, and we've seen a huge increase in the States in terms of number of producers and overall production of hard cider. Anything similar happening in South Africa? Is hard cider becoming trendy there as well?
Cider, we call it just cider, but I've learned that cider here in the US is also apple juice, which was really confusing the first couple of times I went to the shop. But cider is very popular. Mostly because of this big problem that we have in terms of profitability. So people would much rather produce apples to make cider from it than grapes because it's too expensive, etc. There's a very big market for cider because one of the very big companies in South Africa is called the Stel, and they export a lot of ciders, of course, in South Africa and also to the rest of the continent. It's called Savannah. It's dry, but you can drink it. That's the logo they've got. So they do exceptionally well, and people love the ciders. And they also have a sweeter style of a cider. So I think that's why it's also good. I spoke about the demographics earlier, because not a lot of people like to drink the dry, bone-dry ciders. So that's why they also produce a sweeter style cider. So yes, cider is definitely also as well as beer and whiskey. Whiskey is also very popular.
Well, shame we're ending on cider. But quickly before we thank our guest, Erna will also be speaking in my advanced viticultural competency class this afternoon at 2:30 in B22. Those of you who are academically well-versed in horticulture or grapes and wine are welcome to attend the discussion there too. So please join me in thanking our
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.